as my music starts to fade out as I get it correct this time. My name's Anthony Morrissey, CEO and founder of AMSC. I'm delighted to welcome you back to the commercialisation of sports series. Really look forward to talking to you. I'm delighted to have you all back. As you see, I'm still in my little cupboard. Just basically the flu has kicked in around my whole family in Gothenburg, and the cold has also started kicking in even more. So that's why I'm in here to try and relax myself. I have my Cork jersey behind me and I have my Munster rugby jersey to the side, so I'm okay. Anyway, what's been happening in my world the last couple of weeks? Well, obviously, the Rugby World Cup was a massive day for everyone from a South African perspective. A bit sad that Ireland weren't there, but overall, again, look at the background stuff and the work that's done in the background where people like a good friend of mine just joining. Some really fantastic work that was done there, and it's an honour to know people who are involved in it. And obviously, some of the players I would now know as well from my previous history. Also, AMSC has started to do some more little vlogs and podcasts for you. When this finally comes out, you'll have seen the likes of Johan van Graan do an exclusive interview with us. We've had the likes of Matt Cooper, Jackie Hurley, a really good interview coming up. Royal Nugent as well, the RT Sport, former RT Sport commercial director as well. So all those different people that are involved. So please jump onto our website, amsc.se, and you'll get all that information. Or jump onto my YouTube channel and you get to listen to me. Anyway, as everyone says to me, they don't really want to listen to me talking when they come onto these vlogs. They want to listen to the guests that I have. And I really can't wait till you listen to this guest. A fantastic guest. Someone who I've watched grow, because roughly it was the same time that she started within sport that I did. And I've watched her career grow immensely into now being the commercial director for Line Out Sports. Something that I really can't wait to listen to the conversation about what it is, because her passion, not just for sport, but also right across the board, is there for everyone to see. And she started up at Leinster. So anyone that gives out to me saying that I'm a Munster-centric show, I can actually have someone that'll be more of a Leinster topic more than anything else. So, do you know what? I'll just introduce her. Elma Beirne, how are you doing? Are you well?
I'm good, thank you, Anthony. Thanks for having me.
No, I'm delighted that you're here, able to hear. Thank you so much for your time. It really is cool to have you and talk to you. First things first, going back to your kind of origination within sport, your startup within sport, and what it meant to you to be involved in sport. Can you go back to your kind of childhood and where did that passion come from? Was it from your family, friends, or was it just something that you just enjoyed?
Yeah, I think I had two very different parents. So my dad kind of wouldn't be into sports whatsoever. And then you had the other extreme of my mum, who played basketball for Ireland, kind of at an underage level. She unfortunately got a back injury. So I think my brother and I, there's only the two of us are in it. We were kind of heavily influenced into sport. And I suppose what I found really good is, we were into swimming. I was playing, on the hurling team. I was the only girl maybe at under 6, under 7s. So we tried like all different types of sport, dance, karate, volleyball. I think we probably had our mother's head erect. It could have been every year or two was a new sport. But I think for me then it was when I went to Kilkenny College. So I went in 4th to 6th year. My brother went, he's 2 years younger than me. He went from 1st year because he was kind of told by Naas Rugby Club, it'd be important for him to be in a good rugby school. And we didn't really have a clue, you know what I mean, in terms of what are good rugby skills. But we went to Kilkenny College, and that's when I really kind of found my own passion for rugby as well. At 16, so I probably played rugby for maybe about 12 years. Had a little stint in Connacht. Was never fit enough. But a lot of my family come from Connacht, so that's the connection. But I just always enjoyed playing, and would have played with like UCD and captained the team in WIT in my last year, and Blackrock, so a few other teams, Naas Rugby Club and Newbridge as well. So I've always been into it, even like keeping physically kind of fit and the gym and Pilates and all of that. But now I suppose I'm on the other side of things. So I kind of then ended up working in rugby when I was about 25 after doing a master's in UCD. So I've always kind of been involved.
Yeah, going back to that, having obviously with two different kind of pathways within your parents, where one has no interest in sport and one is the kind of uber sport fan or is uber sport kind of talent. When you were growing up, did you have any kind of heroes that you looked up to that you went, do you know what, that's the player? Or was it someone in your local area, or was it someone on the TV that you went, yeah, I'd love to be like that player?
Yeah, I think it was probably kind of more local people. Like my mom used to always say, I'd be there screaming on the sidelines, even when I was like a really, really small kid. So I think it was just probably being exposed to different types of sports. And you know, I have a very, very close relationship with my mom. She's one of my best friends. She is my best friend, outside of my fiance John, of course. But better get that in there.
Yes.
But she never like pushed us into anything. So, you know, even my brother ended up playing semi-professional rugby in France before he did his ACL in, but it was always, we were kind of always given that freedom, and always encouraged. You know, I would have remembered her bringing us to, like, you know, corporate boxes, because she used to work in Bank of Ireland private bank, and so she would even bring me as her guest at 12. And it's those sorts of memories, you know, watching Kildare playing, you know, and going up to a big stadium when you're young. I think they kind of have lasting impacts on you.
Yeah, can you remember what it was like when you were 12, going in towards, not just a corporate box, but going into a big stadium? Like, I'm assuming if it was Kildare, going into Croker. What was that like? Can you remember that feeling walking down Jones's Road, for example, into Croke Park? What was it like as a 12-year-old?
Yeah, I think it was just like the scale of everything was, you were just kind of, you know, you weren't exposed to it. You weren't used to going to it. And by the way, I think I only went to a corporate box once when I was a child. But I just remember that as a standout experience. And then I suppose as I moved into my career, then working in, you know, later in the FAI and managing the different hospitality suites, you know, it's kind of funny then how, you know, a small bit of exposure could actually shape your career going forward, maybe subconsciously.
Yeah, you said to me, when it comes to your pathway moving on, you'd said to me in one of the conversations we had previously around Mick Dawson, and just a conversation you had with Mick, the great famous Leinster CEO. And when I started with Munster, there was two pillars of Irish rugby, and it was Gareth Fitzgerald and Mick Dawson. Can you explain to everyone about that conversation with Mick, and how that kind of allowed you to get into what is now an established and successful sporting career?
Yeah, so I did a master's back in UCD, I think it was 2011, 2012. And I definitely was not the studious type, but I am, I suppose, highly competitive. And when I kind of set my mind on something, I do tend to achieve it. So I was kind of like, right, I'm going to get a 1-1 in the masters. And I'd have fights with lecturers being like, you're not a 1-1 student. And I was like, no, I'm gonna get it. So it was me and actually another guy, Tom. So two of us ended up getting it that year. But what we were always encouraged to do, we'd have amazing guest speakers come in. So, you know, Mick Dawson was actually one of the guest speakers, and we were always encouraged, you know, kind of at that young age to start to network and ask somebody, you know, go up after class and, you know, introduce yourself and maybe explain a bit of your passion, or and so on, and asked them for their business card. So I got Mick Dawson's business card, and at the end of the course, I was so tunnel vision. I was playing rugby, you know, loved it, just finished my studies, and I was I want to work in Ireland. I'm a little bit of a home bird. I love staying, you know what I mean? I love, you know, I was just moved up to Dublin just when I was 24, so I was only starting to get into, you know, the nightlife scene up here and stuff. And really wanted to work in rugby. So I rang Mick Dawson and I was like, you know, is there any jobs going? I'm happy to work for free, whatever it takes, because, you know, I didn't have any kind of connections within, you know, the IRFU or Leinster rugby. So I ended up then doing a 7-month internship for free. It was funny. I previously did a lecture with Holly Smith, who's been one of our guests. I worked with Holly in the FAI. She made a really good point in that lecture, being like, you should always put a value on your time. So I did the 7 months for free. I don't know if I'd highly recommend that length of time, but it did definitely pay off. And I think, you know, it was probably one of the best places that I've ever worked in terms of being in such high performance culture. You know, a lot of the people, some of them are even still there. And, you know, to be in at, you know, nearly getting your dream job as your first job was amazing. It's also the sort of place you'd love to end up retiring in, because it's the people, the people were just so amazing to work with, and, you know, really a good mindset of trying to bring you along when you're kind of a newbie and fresh into it and really passionate and all these ideas. So very, very fond memories of, I was there for about 5.5 years. So it was a good stint. It was really hard to leave there.
Yeah, you're speaking my language. Working at Munster, I fully agree. It's the people. Leinster's the exact same. So it's Connacht, so it's Ulster. That's what makes Irish rugby an unbelievably difficult place to leave. So I fully agree with that. What I find really interesting is that you you backed yourself into that 7 months. I'm assuming from a competitive perspective, when you were going into that 7 months, your dream was like, I'm getting a job out of this. That seems what your goal was. When you were starting out there, what was the kind of roles that you went into to get into your 5 years? What was the pathway from a very starting point? What was the first kind of roles you were doing in that internship?
Yeah, so I was kind of working in the commercial department. So one of the roles, there was a real change in sponsorship at the time. So, Bank of Ireland have been involved in the provinces for many years, but the sole focus kind of up to then was very much focused on the professional side of things. And during my kind of tenure there was very much a shift into grassroots and, the whole concept around like the 12 county army and one province was born. So I was very much then trying to activate and bring to life, because it's not just going to Donnybrook or the D4 clubs. It's the guys in New Ross Rugby Club, or all the different initiatives that all of these different clubs run. So like, I even still laugh now. I still know somebody in nearly every single rugby club in Leinster. Even I was on a shoot there with a few of our players in Adidas in Maynooth, and bumped into people I might have seen in like maybe 8 or 9 years. But I suppose that's one of the joys of sport. So yeah, it was really focusing on the promotion of the domestic game. So everything from like schools rugby, clubs rugby, junior, women's, and even some of like the age grade teams, and women's was probably under that umbrella at the time, and lifting the promotion of the game. And obviously I was just kind of one person in that role, but during my time I would have set up a domestic PR subcommittee with the likes of Jacinta O'Rourke and Barry Lampkin, a few really good people involved. And they would have been involved in like writing more for the game, coming up with really good concepts for like big screen ads and initiatives. And I think Richie McElwee as well was involved in that, who's now in Rugby Players Ireland. So we'd really good people on this committee. It wasn't just me, it was everybody on a volunteer basis as well, to kind of lift the promotion. So it was something that I was very passionate in, playing club rugby as well at the time. So yeah, it was brilliant.
Yeah, and then going across your whole pathway from then on, moving towards the FAI, into URC, and obviously now into Line-Up Sports. Going back to that time when you first started within Leinster and you were in the commercial team, do you see a massive difference now commercially from how brands approach even that conversation around the 12 County Ireland, or about growing the game domestically, how brands approached you guys in that conversation first rather than the other way, and when they came to you guys and you kind of promoting that? Do you see a massive difference now to what you would have seen back 12, 13 years ago?
Yeah, I think nearly all brands that either we work with or that sponsor bigger teams are tapping into, and I'm sure women in sport is definitely going to come up, but it's even elements like diversity, inclusion, like all brands pretty much now want to be seen to not just be focused on the male game. It's also about the female game. It's also other initiatives that really tap back into their kind of core business objectives. So I think from that perspective, I think there was a shift. We're in the middle of maybe another shift that's going to keep continuing on. So yeah, I definitely think it's a lot more of a holistic kind of a route, rather than focused on, you rarely see now a brand picking one or the other. A lot of the times it's to encompass, all different elements of the game or the chosen sport.
Yeah, and I think there's also an element within CSR as well, where brands have changed their opinions, where in the past they just wanted to get their name on the jersey, or the name in a perfect position in this on an advertisement board, or they wanted to get tickets or hospitality, whatever it is. Those days are gone. Those days are now dead. It's now about what is the connection and link. And it also means then, and I'm assuming you'll have seen this completely when it comes to the players and the brands and the clubs and the federations you're dealing with at Line-Up Sports, that it's now a case of, well, does it fit with both cultures? So does the brand's idea and thought process fit with the club or federation or individual players' thought process about their career? Can you talk a little bit about that from a Line-Up Sports perspective when you're dealing with either the player, the federation, or the club, and you don't have to go into detail of each one, about how you would kind of connect those two things together?
Yes, I suppose in Line-Up Sports, we're like trusted advisors to, so whether it's we're working with brands or agencies or right holders, but we manage, a range of different athletes. So we're, I suppose, heavy in rugby, but also in the Olympic space with the O'Donovan brothers and Fintan McCarthy and Kelly Harrington. And we're growing out even in the Paralympic space as well with Nicole Turner. So what we try to do is to create partnerships through meaningful campaigns. And there has to be that authentic connection, because number one, like, I don't know if it's our athletes or if this is across the board, but somebody's not going to put their name or their personal brand to something that they don't fully believe in. So a lot of the times, even if it's like a short campaign, and we do this with, various times throughout the year, they have to fully understand, like, what does the brand stand for? We even have one athlete who's massively into sustainability and will want to check the packaging and so on before he puts his name to it. So it's not just here's a few K, go to this event, show up here. I think that stage is long gone. And I think, if it's very easy to see through when somebody does a bit of a tick the box, and sometimes campaigns then don't work for that specific reason. So I think, like, the fit has to be absolutely spot on. And that's probably the most important thing, I would say.
Yeah, and it's also the most time consuming to make sure you get right, but it has a long-term positive effect for everybody, because it just sits nicely within it. And whether, as you said, whether that's with Paralympic sports, whether that's with rugby, whether that's with any element of it, an overall federation, I think that's important to see within it. And then,
and sorry to interrupt you, I think even there you mentioned, like, long-term. I think, like, that's one thing that I'm very passionate about, because I think, the nation is, intelligent. They see when things are a short flash in the pan. And I think those longer term partnerships, with it, whether it's with an individual or whether it's with a club or, a country, for example, they come across as a lot more authentic when they fully invest for X number of years, rather than these kind of one-off campaigns. So that's kind of a trend that we're seeing more as well.
Also, as well, the brands buying into the story. I think it's also that's something that I've seen in the last 2 or 3 years, that it's that link and connection, rather than we want to get your logo, or in the case of a sports person, that they want to get their face on a piece of paper that they can show to everyone. It's now the buy into the story and behind the story, and it's no longer just talking about the team or the individual player as their sports person. It's almost finding about their personality and what makes them tick, and creating that feeling and aura between brands linking together and connecting. And I think for me, when I first started working in sport, I was told by my great late Gareth Fitzgerald CEO, this is how much money I need you to bring in. I don't care how you do it. I need to get it done in 6 months. Let's go make your phone calls. To now, the conversations will be very much, okay, what type of industry do we want to be into? What are they the same values as us? Are they connected to us? Then we're going, which player within our player pool can we look to link and connect into that individual brand, so that there's a proper chart and link going through long term. And the long term bit is where I totally agree with you in, because people buy in with long term values and understand that, okay, these guys are committed for 4 or 5, whatever that length of time is, and they buy into, everybody gets a buy in, and a feeling of not just safety, but a feeling of connectivity right across the board. Moving it towards the future of it, and because we've seen such a massive push in the last 2 or 3 years around how people consume sport and how people watch it. So whether that's going to a game personally, whether that's watching it on their phone. And I look at the NFL, for example. If you watch an NFL game on a Sunday, you'll have what's called the Red Zone, which will be on your Sky Sports page. You'll have your own DAZN account you might have on your phone, you might have it on somebody else's phone, you might be watching with friends. Suddenly you've got loads of different screens that come into it, and that's kind of exploded the last 2 or 3 years, which means brands have to kind of change the way they think about how they market themselves in those platforms. Where do you see the next stages? If we've said that's happened the last 2 or 3 years, people consuming sport differently, and I would include women in sport in that. So how they watch sport, whether that's male, female, it's changed completely how they look at things. Where do you see over the next 2 or 4 years? Where's the next steps that you see people going when it comes to the future of sport?
Yeah, I think it's a big question in terms of consuming sports and versus the future of sports. But I think, like, we've talked a lot about women in sport, and I do think that's massive. And when you see the likes of, what little I've done with the GA, and I know these are some of the bigger sponsorships that people tend to mention, or Sky with the women's team, like I think Irish rugby on the women's side is maybe a little bit lagging in terms of its promotion and the elevation of the game. So I think that's definitely an area. Obviously, it goes hand in hand with performance as well. But I think in terms of like activation and getting a sponsor involved to really elevate it to the next level, because as you mentioned earlier on, there's so many different types of human interest stories. And like we look after a good proportion of the current players, current female players, and also some of the current and the former as well. And there's such amazing stories to be told that I feel like that's one untapped area. I suppose as well in terms of fan engagement, there's a lot of different best in class examples across Europe. I was at a game seeing my friend in Toronto. Even like we can pick up things from different kind of sports and integrate them back into the Irish system. So yeah, I think we've a little bit to go in terms of some elements of the game.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Just on a point you made, I want to double down on that, is I remember when I worked at Munster, we had a London dinner where we invited ex-players over, and we made a big deal about making sure that if we invited 5 ex-players who were male, we made sure we invited 5 ex-players who were female. And then we went on stage and we had current players, and again, the same conversation. If we had a group of current players, we'd also both sides, male and female. And I remember the event was just after COVID, so the crowd was very, very kind of like, the atmosphere was electric, but it was also very loud. I remember the male players went on, and they were good, and everyone were going to listen to them, but there was still a bit of chat. And then I remember vividly, Dorothy Wall went on, was one, Maeve O'Leary, and Emer Considine went on the stage, and they just killed the crowd. It was brilliant. Jackie Hurley was the interviewer, and it wasn't because they were talking about the game, is they were talking about their pathway and their passion to why they feel the next steps are needed. And it was very, very engaged. And what was amazing was some of our main sponsors for that event came up to us afterwards and were like, I want to know more about that person and that person. And they weren't talking about the senior Munster rugby players. They were talking about all three of the women involved. And it stood out to me that exactly what you just said, it's such an untapped market for stories, because that's what sport commercialization is going towards, in my opinion. It's about those stories and what makes a Dorothy Wall get up at 5 o'clock in the morning, do her job, and then also go training with Blackrock and then go play for Munster Ireland. What is it about those stories around all 4 provinces that creates that growth market within not just Irish rugby, but also within different sports? And then it's about the sponsor of those teams or those individual clubs hanging on to that and making themselves connected into that story without it becoming oh God, here's this sponsor. So this is obviously a sponsor story. It's a link and a connection. And what you spoke about earlier is interesting as well, about the longevity of it. The longer you do that, the longer you connect to it, the more interesting it will be. Is that a fair comment for me to make about using those women as an example?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, when we look at the likes of Sky and what they did at the time, I was at one of the Federation of Irish Sport. They had a commercial event about maximising sponsorships last week, and Caroline Donnellan from Sky, I think she's the brand manager. She talked about the story of, where the women were actually at in terms of performance when they chose to get involved. In terms of then the whole way through the campaign, what year 1 looked like, what year 2 looked like. And I think that's something similar that's needed within the women's game in rugby, because I feel like it is an untapped market at the moment. I think, they still have done massive amounts of work in terms of, bringing the game to where it is now. But I think in terms of that kind of sponsor activation, there's definitely a lot more work that could be done.
On activation, just a quick one. Is there anything in your career that stands out that makes you go, that was really cool? Didn't cost a lot of money, but that was a really cool bit of activation. It can be any sport. It can be something you were involved in, or it can be something that you saw. Is there anything when I said that question that came to your mind?
Ooh, it's a tricky one. I'm remembering my early days of the Bank of Ireland activating at the Ploughing Championship and us bringing down players to it. So I've a wide range of different stories, but I think some of the brands, you know what I mean? There's some, campaigns that, we haven't worked on. I love, it was probably one of the bigger campaigns, but Allianz and the Women's Aid, they done, I think it was called the Stand Strong campaign with Allianz and Women's Aid. And, they really stood up for an issue. And, they committed like €1 million to this partnership to break the silence, like, you know, from the TV ads to how they activated it, you know, like bringing everybody together on the beach and doing all these like very much well-being, you know, activations. I thought that was phenomenal. And then, you know, we'd work with other maybe more social media influenced campaigns, like the likes of Connecticut. We have a few of our athletes with Connecticut, and I think they do a fantastic job on probably lower budgets of how they would use like a Josh van der Fleer and then also a Daniel Davy on the nutrition side of things. But there's real, again, some of it I think goes back to either like really champion certain causes or that authentic connection, where, you know, Daniel would have been Josh's nutritionist, so he can kind of bring out some of those human sides of the story. So I think, like, no matter what the budget is, I think if a brand is really clear with the objectives and then stripping it back to like what channels they want to be on, I think there is room, depending on the budget, or, you know, little plug for you, Anthony, using your services.
Thank you.
Pluggy plug. But you know what I mean? Just getting that strategy piece right, because I think sometimes brands try to be everything to everybody, where it's like if you just really keep kind of honing down, you know, who exactly are we targeting, just going back to the basics, you know, who's our target market, who's our demographics, where do we need to be, kind of taking a step backwards. Yeah, I think that can be quite powerful.
I also think the days of doing, and I 100% agree with what you said just there, the days of doing a generic campaign and hoping that it clicks with what we're looking for is gone. Almost people now want one-to-one conversations. So it's the drive to survive attitude from the Netflix series. It's those ideas that it's like, I want to not just know something, I want to be educated, I want to be informed, but I really want to know, does Josh van der Fleer eat a Mars bar or a Twix? Like, does Johnny Sexton, when he gets up in the morning, does he have like certain type of coffee or a different type of coffee? All those personal stories and personal links makes it even more connected into. And it's why I feel personally that a lot of brands are looking down the road, as you guys will know as well, around players and linking those players as much as looking at the club and the federation, because the club's main assets is obviously their players, and that little feeling and connectivity into it allows you to be a bit more fun and engaged, but it also allows the brand to think about it and go, okay, who exactly are we speaking to? Who do we want to speak to? And when we're talking to them, what is it about the individual player or the federation or the club or the sport that ties those people together? And it's passion, it's connectivity, and it's feeling like you know them. And it's what makes certain teams, certain players so much more attractive to brands, because they have that connectivity and that feeling of a love and a connection.
And I think like one thing that we do in Lineup Sports is we invest every single year in research with On-Site Sports. So we measure all of our talent, but one of the findings that came out of our research this year, and, you know, it's probably quite a generic maybe statement to make, but behind the scenes content is still one of the number one things that people want to see, or even some of the surprise and delight. So we worked on a lovely campaign with Heineken Ireland and Pink House, where for the whole Rugby World Cup, we'd former players in 4 different locations around Ireland pop up for a green hour to, you know, it wasn't a formal Q&A. It was, they were there pulling pints of Heineken, having a bit of crack, taking selfies. So like, it can be something quite straightforward with that, but it's like that real fan interaction, surprise and delight behind the scenes, you know what I mean? Getting a selfie with some of your heroes, that can work really well.
I remember we did a campaign at Munster when Razzie Erasmus was the director of rugby, and they called it the War Room. And it still stands out as one of the most amazing things I've seen, because it cost us nothing, where we invited 15 sponsors or patrons or people we want to look after the night before a big European Cup game into the dressing room. But we took their phones off them before they came in, and we made a big deal about, like, you can't have your phone, there's nobody else. And they sat down in a player's position in the dressing room, and the Razzie, and at the time it was Felix Jones and Jerry Flannery, came in and did the team talk as if they were the players. So now you got these 15 guys being told what Munster were going to do the next day against whoever they were playing, right down to the videography bit where we're going to target this player in the air, we're going to target down the blind side for whatever reason. And they obviously didn't give everything, but they gave enough for the person watching going, this is amazing. And at the end of it, they were all handed sheets. Every one of those sheets were counted back, so that we made sure there was no one there. And Razzie turned around to that group and said, you're the only people that know that outside the players. So if it goes on social media, I know it's one of your 15. And then the next day we brought them to hospitality. They did a hospitality event. And I remember at the start of the game, Felix had said they were going to go left off the kickoff. And I'm going to myself, please go left, please go left. And all I remember is when they went left, I looked at the hospitality tickets where the 15 guys were, and they were all looking around going, oh my God, that's what we know what's coming next. And I remember after the event, we did a kind of a review afterwards. What did you think? And every one of them were like, yeah, that was brilliant. It cost Munster Rugby, I don't know, a bit of food and a bit of drink on that night. But the overall buzz it created was that, as you said, that individual piece, that feeling of being something that's linked and directly into it. And then I just think the more of those kind of ideas that brands can have, the more feeling of that connectivity and that not money but can't buy experience, but it's almost that like, yeah, you're behind the curtain here. And it's really important that you don't say that to anybody because no one else knows. And Adidas are perfect example. I know Darren Beirne and Adidas would kill me for not saying to him because he was one of the people that also did something similar to that in Germany when he was over there. And it's just such a cool idea of how to really engage with a small number of people who then go and spread the word to absolutely everybody about how cool it is. I'm going to finish on my last topic, which is I started off doing this, calling it like a quick fire top 10, but it's ended up not being because some of my questions people are like, oh, I have to think about this a couple of seconds. So what I'll call it is a top 10, but it's like whatever comes to your mind first. Right?
Perfect.
It's not going to catch you out. Don't worry. I'm not going to say anything mad. I promise you. Right. Are you ready?
Yep.
Perfect. Netflix or the cinema?
Netflix.
What's the last thing you watched on Netflix?
So this isn't Netflix. This is my pure guilty pleasure. Married at First Sight UK. It's absolute junk, but I love it.
Wow. My wife would be so proud of you. Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Favorite stadium we've ever been in?
Ooh, I think like you always refer to favorite stadiums with memories. So my brother had a joint stag and I was the groom's lady. So I was one of the only female out of 40 guys. And we all went over to the Principality Stadium, must have been about 3 years ago. So I think that whole weekend and stadium stand out to me.
Yeah, Principality is pretty class, but add on a stag, which would be even better. I love that idea. Stories galore, I can imagine. Best takeaway. So either the type of food or the place. Not mind.
I'm in between. I love a proper chipper. Very healthy.
Yes.
Proper chipper. Yeah, there's an amazing one, hot and tender in Trim. So I'm just living in Meath and have to give a shout out to that one. It's phenomenal.
There's one in Bray called Macari's across the road from the Royal Hotel, and I lived in Bray for 20 years, and if I go back there, I have to go there when it's open. They do the most amazing curry chips. Is insane, and I miss it so much living in Sweden. The smartest, you've already answered that. Favorite ever player that you've had to meet?
That is such a tough question. I think when I was younger, I really looked up to Paul O'Connell, but I think what's nice now is like there's actually female role models.
Yes.
Which I don't think maybe in my generation they were there as much.
I think that's a brilliant answer, especially how Sky did the activation of the women's football team, how it was an announcement that was done, and how brilliant it was where the girl was kicking the ball against the wall and she's saying Katie McCabe's name and she's saying the rest of the squad. I think that was exactly what you're talking about. That's where the positivity from that football World Cup, that's going to be long lasting, because the days of talking women or girls talking about Lionel Messi or talking about Ronaldo or whatever in football when it comes to soccer, they're now going to be changing that to Katie McCabe's, etc. And that's the real plus, and that's where you get your longevity perspective. So love that answer. Biggest heartbreak in sport?
Probably I'm going to say the very recent Rugby World Cup. It was like doomsday in our office that Monday. I just think to have come so close, to have beaten South Africa, it was just a shame. But I think there's so much goodwill behind the team. I think they've done themselves really, really proud.
Yeah, I think it was so unfortunate the groups they were put into, and we all saw in the semi-finals then the quarter-finals, the France, South Africa, the Ireland, New Zealand. That should have been the semi-finals, if I'm honest. And there's a bounce of a ball for both games. And yeah, I think that was heartbreak for me. The heartbreak comes when Ireland played New Zealand in in Aviva that time when New Zealand scored a try in the last minute. It's the only time I've left the stadium. She was my fiancée at the time, my wife now, and we both went back to get our car. It went 45 minutes to walk back, and neither of us said a word. Not a word, didn't say anything. Just walked back to the car, got in the car, turned on the radio and drove back to Cork. But I remember that feeling of just desolation that sport gives you. But then on the flip side, we were also there when we beat New Zealand. So it's you gotta go through the pain to get the success. And I think that's
True.
part of sport, really. Unfortunately, only some teams get success. Last one, sports definition. So if you could define sport for you and what it means and what it feels like, what definition would you give it?
I think for me, I suppose sport means everything to me. I've worked in it for the last 12 years. I studied it for 6 years before that. I, exercise every day pretty much. So it's pretty much my whole life. And I think, when you work in maybe a busy job, it keeps you sane at the end of the day. So whether you're consuming it or playing it or even just keeping physically active, it kind of is your whole life, I suppose.
Yeah, it is. Whenever I think about that question, I always think, well, if sport wasn't there, I really don't know what I'd do with my life. I'd have loads of time, but I don't know what I'd talk about to my friends. Me and my friends would just probably just look at each other. We wouldn't have anything else to talk about. Elma, thank you so much for your time, for jumping on. I really, really do appreciate it. We put in the details down below of some of the other stuff that you're talking about as well and how they get access to it. But just if somebody wanted to get involved with Line of Sports or look up about you and find out more about you, what's the best place to get hold of you guys?
Yeah, perfect. Probably have a look on our Instagram. So it's Line Up Sports with an S. Or just reach out to us on LinkedIn, either Elma or my name is there on the screen. So yeah, feel free to get in touch.
I'll make sure I put that down into the YouTube links as well so people can do that. Elma, thank you so much for your time. Have an absolutely fantastic day. Really, really do appreciate it.
Thanks a million, Anthony. Appreciate it.
That was exactly what I thought it was going to be. An absolutely fantastic conversation with somebody who, one, has massive passion in sport, but has the knowledge and experience to go with that. Very similar to other conversation I had with Holly Smith around how she started in it, and a conversation with Mick Dawson. But again, what I've spoke about other people before, it's all well and good getting that opportunity. You then have to go and show your actual skill and be very good at what you do to then go and have that longevity of a career. So it's all well and good getting the opportunity. A lot of people get opportunities, but they don't know how to deal with it. We had Johan van Gran on recently, and he was saying that also. It's about the real skill of a person is how they go about and activate that and how they go about create that career. And Elma's done that with a real passion. It's also interesting how she looked at sport from a female perspective and where she sees the growth in that. I think it's also interesting about from a brand to start thinking again. I mentioned this before. Start thinking again, not just about having your logo on a jersey, not just having your advertisement or your tickets. It's more about linking into the personal stories and the feelings and connections that will be there with that. Anyway, I've taken up loads of your time again, as usual. It's absolutely fantastic to talk to Elma. We've got loads of people coming up as guests as well. So please do have a keep on our website, amsc.se, or follow me on LinkedIn, YouTube, all the usual places that you possibly can. Anyway, my music's going to kick me out. Thanks again for your time. Look after yourselves and take care.